And the aim of today's webinar really is to provide an understanding of where energy is used in the warehousing environment, to establish what low and no cost measures in particular can be taken to reduce your energy expenditure, and then to review the opportunities for investment, in particular in lighting, in heating, and also in terms of equipment used in the warehouse. We'll also look at renewable energy generation options, which could be suitable for the warehousing sector, and talk further about how to avail of the services through the Green Business Fund. So an important point to note there, and one of the biggest opportunities for savings that we see through the Green Business Fund is the opportunity to move from existing conventional lighting to LED solutions. And in many cases, this can reduce your energy use by as much as 80% through improved efficiency lighting solutions, and also through improved use of controls. So warehousing has increased its significance over the last decade or so. This chart is taken from CBRE. Is their property perspective from the first half of 2018. You can see there on the chart how much the online sales have increased. They have increased threefold since 2009. And more generally, that has led to a need for greater logistics space. You can see there the requirement for logistics space has increased 1.5 times over that same time period. And I suppose sadly in many cases it means that the impact of that has been a reduction in retail sales and a reduction to a certain extent in retail space on the high street. But overall it means that warehousing is more important in terms of its energy consumption, and that's what we're going to look at today. So in terms of where energy is used in the warehousing and logistics sector, this chart gives a typical split of energy use for a 15,000 metre squared ambient warehouse with built-in offices. It's taken from work that was carried out by the Carbon Trust with the UK Warehousing Association back in 2010. You can see there that lighting accounts for 65% of energy use. If a warehouse was using LED solutions already, that would be a lower proportion of the mix. But between lighting and space heating there, you can see that they account for about 80% of energy use, with other areas such as offices, battery charging, vending machines, fans, pumps, IT, hot water, making up the rest of the energy use in the warehouse sector. So going to look firstly at short, medium and long-term measures that can be taken. And I'll focus mainly on the short and medium term here, because we'll come into the long-term options later into the presentation when we look at the individual technologies. In terms of heating, I suppose what we're looking at there in terms of simple measures is reducing the temperature set points or increasing cooling set points where they're used. So we'd recommend a 19 degrees C set point for heating in office spaces, lower in the warehouse itself, and a 23 degrees C set point for cooling. And also it's worth reviewing your operating hours, looking at the controllers and making sure that they match up with the requirements of your building. In terms of lighting, it's looking at the light levels you have. Maybe you're overlighting some spaces. That perhaps could be set back, or you could reduce the number of fittings you have, or simply switch off areas of lighting that aren't required. Also, at the end of the day, at the end of the shift, it's important that there is a procedure in place, that somebody is on hand to go round and switch off all the lighting to make sure it's not left on overnight or through the weekend where the warehouse isn't operating. Another simple measure to save money would be to look at the forklift charging to make sure that they are charging overnight with lower electricity tariffs rather than being charged during the day. And again, there's a number of medium-term options that can be picked up on whenever it comes to the maintenance cycle, looking at the insulation of heating pipework, also the insulation around any air conditioning pipework you have, making sure that's up to standard, making adjustments to radiators, space heater locations, things like that, just to optimize your existing systems, and also simple measures just to ensure you're getting good levels of natural light through roof lights or windows where they are. Also, as well as that, looking at motor efficiency, looking at that particular whenever it comes to CRANAGE or other motors that you have on site. And if you do need to replace or rewind motors, it's worth looking to make sure that you're making the right decision in terms of efficiency when you carry that out. As I say, I'll not go into the long-term measures at this point because we'll come on to that later, but it gives an overall reference there. So the first section we're going to come on to here is lighting. Now, it's something we often cover at the Carbon Trust, and it still remains a significant opportunity for businesses. And given the proportion of lighting we saw there back in the previous chart that's used on lighting in warehouses, it still remains a significant opportunity. So if you haven't upgraded your lighting in recent years, if you still remain with fluorescent or metal halide solutions, it is worth looking at a move to LED. You can see here in the chart that LED performance has surpassed all other lighting types available. The efficacy is available, the efficiency essentially in terms of the amount of light output relative to the power input, which is shown here in lumens per watt, it is now higher than any other solution. So typically you'll see good quality LED solutions giving you in excess of 100 lumens per watt, sometimes at 120 to 150. So efficiency is one aspect whenever it comes to lighting, but there's a lot of other considerations. Lighting can impact health and well-being, so it's important to get the right lighting type whenever you change. It's also worth looking at illumination levels to make sure you're not overlighting spaces and to ensure that you're also providing enough lighting for safety. Light color is important whenever it comes to warehouses, especially whenever it comes to product picking and activities like that. You need to have the right light color to be able to see correctly, and that applies to color rendering to make sure that the workers within the space are able to see accurately and correctly. As well as that, you want to avoid glare, so the system needs to be well designed to do that. And as we've talked about already, the main aim is often to reduce costs and to reduce energy use. So in terms of LED solutions, we mentioned that there previously, the efficacy, as you can see at the bottom of this chart, in terms of lumens per watt, is improving constantly. It's now moving towards 150 lumens per watt. The other aspects of lighting design are addressed well by modern LEDs. So you're seeing color rendering, the CRI index close to 100, which is ideal for LED solutions. So it's giving you much better quality of light, especially whenever considered to the likes of high pressure sodium systems, which tend to give a yellower colour of light. In addition to that, it's also giving very good lamp life. You're seeing solutions that are in the range of 50,000 hours or more in terms of lamp life. That's much improved on conventional fluorescent or metal halide solutions. So it should mean then that you'll be able to reduce your maintenance cycles and not replace lighting as often with the LED solutions. And other things to consider if you are upgrading your lighting would be the positioning of the luminaires. Are they in the right place for your racking layout? Do you want to keep them in the same position, or do you need a redesign? Also, if you are overlighting presently, it may be beneficial just to reduce the number of fittings you have, change the layout, and then that will require a redesign. At that stage, it's worth looking at lighting plots to make sure that you're going to get the levels of light that are required, and competent suppliers are able to provide that for you. Also, the condition of your existing wiring could be an issue. If it's not up to the standard, it might be an opportunity to replace it at that time, and to make sure that you can get a safe system put in place. The same applies to emergency lighting. Again, if there's a need to bring it up to standard, that can be addressed at the same time as your lighting upgrade. And as well as that, if you have large facilities, it may be the case that you want to replace some of the lighting across the building, but maybe not all. So maybe your office space, if it has lower hours, or storage areas off from the main warehouse, you may want to leave those as is and just prioritize the main areas that are operating for the longest hours. So in terms of the cost savings, essentially there is a massive difference, as you can see here, from conventional discharge lighting. So the cost there for metal halide discharge at 400 watts, operating continuously, as can be the case in some warehouse applications, cost there for every single fitting is in around £385 a year. That's based on a unit rate of 10 pence, and also allows for some of the losses that are associated in the control gear with that lighting type. You may have already moved to T5 fluorescent. You can see there that the cost per fitting for 220 watts of fluorescent, which is essentially 4 by 55 watt T5s, which is a very common solution, is in around £212. But all of that is surpassed by the LED solution there. You can see a typical size would be 150 watts for warehousing. It's operating there at £130 per year. So that's obviously a very significant saving to be had if you're moving in particular from discharge to LED. And indeed, there's a case to be made for moving from fluorescent to LED as well here. So just looking at a recent application that we've had through the Green Business Fund, this is a recent project that upgraded lighting in a 2,800 metre squared warehouse. You can see there it wasn't operating long hours, about 2,000 per year, which equates to just over 40 a week. So not high usage, which is interesting given the good payback you can see there below. It was utilising T8 fluorescent, slightly less efficient than the T5 that's more modern, but they switched to LED, and they were able to reduce their lighting use from 25,000 kilowatt hours down to just under 4,000 kilowatt hours. So that reduced the lighting load from 12.25 kilowatts down to 4.1 kilowatts. So it's a reduction of about 2/3, and that's pretty typical for LED solutions. They're typically reducing lighting power by that sort of level. And then there's the opportunity to bring in automatic controls through daylight dimming, through presence detection, and that can provide further savings. And that was the case here. You can see here the overall saving came out at about 85%, and they were able to save £2,700 per year. The project cost just under £9,000, and that gave a payback of just over 3 years, 3.3 years. So that's a good example of the type of projects that are coming through the Green Business Fund. We are still offering capital contributions, and this project was supported by a capital contribution of £1,340, which improved the payback period further. And in terms of costings there, we would often look at the cost per every kilowatt of light, and essentially the cost there at just over £2,000 per kilowatt is relatively typical, fairly keen in terms of pricing for projects we're seeing coming through the Green Business Fund. So just to summarise on lighting, LED light sources can reduce your lighting power by as much as 80% in some circumstances, and it gives significant savings even when you're moving from the likes of T5 fluorescent. Secondly, there's no point in illuminating a space if nobody's there. It's useful to consider occupancy detection, to put in sensors to switch off lighting in areas when it's not required. That can be achieved very successfully in warehouse spaces and can be used to good effect even where you've got high-speed forklifts. The sensor technology is quite advanced in that regard and is able to pick up forklifts and people coming into aisles and switch on the lighting in good time. As well as that, you might have good natural light coming through. You might get that from roof lights or from windows in certain circumstances. So if you are looking at a new solution, it's worth bearing that in mind, bringing in daylight dimming where it's suitable, and reducing the amount of artificial light use during periods of good daylight. So in summary, the savings of 70 to 80% would be fairly typical from lighting projects that we're seeing through the GBF. In the previous example, we saw slightly higher, and in some cases that can be achieved. So if you haven't upgraded your lighting, it's certainly worth taking a look. Okay, the next aspect we're going to look at is heating. And as we mentioned earlier, there are some very simple opportunities in terms of making savings just through reducing your set points. So for every 1 degree C of overheating, or indeed of overcooling if you are using air conditioning systems, the energy costs typically rise by around 8%. As well as that, it's always useful to look at time control to make sure that systems are switched off out of hours and that they're not operating unnecessarily. This gives a good summary of common heating types that you would see in warehouse sector and more generally. So the boiler systems on the left there would be typical of what you'd see feeding radiator networks, or indeed fan coil units that are fed by low temperature hot water or by steam. Warm air heaters are very common in warehouse spaces, as too is radiant heating, both of which have their advantages and disadvantages. In office spaces, you may well be looking at electric heating, similar to what we have in the image there, or potentially you may be using heat pumps through air conditioning systems to provide heating and cooling to the offices. So the following slide just summarised the pros and cons of the various different technology types. So you can see here, warm air is fairly commonly used. It is a quick and effective way of heating a large space. The disadvantage, though, is there can be significant heat loss through doors, through stratification, and there's the need to heat the entire space, essentially. It can lead to good energy performance where it's deployed in a well-insulated building, where it has good control, appropriate set points, and doesn't suffer from the sort of heat losses that we've outlined there as well. Other older systems often rely on low temperature hot water or steam to provide a circuit around the warehouse space. Tends to be legacy solutions, and it tends to be quite lossy unless it's well maintained. It is expensive to operate and maintain, and the energy performance is typically poor. So it is worth looking towards alternatives to this, to move potentially to radiant, to warm air, or to air rotation. In terms of radiant heating, it's very good at heating people without heating the entire space. So it means you can heat local areas, you can put localized systems in to heat staff, and it is good where it's used in a well-controlled way and the positions are optimized. The downside potentially could be product requirements. If you have a requirement to store products at a higher temperature, heating local areas and using radiant heating may not lead to high enough air temperatures to heat the space more generally. Air rotation devices are commonly used in large warehouses. They can avoid stratification. They heat a high volume of air with very low velocity and just continually circulate it slowly. Can provide a more even temperature. The downside is there's a higher investment cost, but where you're looking at a new warehouse in particular or a refurbishment, it does provide a very good solution and provides good energy performance where it's well planned and designed. As well as a need for heat, there will be a need for hot water in most situations. Sometimes that can be fed from cylinders, from combi boilers, or potentially from electric point of use systems. Often, given that there's not a need to heat the warehouse space throughout the summer, it makes sense to decouple heating and hot water and potentially look towards point of use electric systems. They tend now to be quite efficient at delivering low volumes of water for hand washing, for kitchen requirements, and for things of that nature. Another thing to consider is your air conditioning units. Where you have heat pumps in place, they can be a good solution. They can provide an efficient option for heating and cooling. But there are planned changes in legislation, and they're really aiming to reduce the use of HFCs over the coming decade. And looking at the chart in this table, it really means that the traditional HFCs, the likes of R410A and the likes of 134A there, they are at the upper end of the GWP figures, which is the global warming potential figures. So it's a slow change that's been brought through by legislation, but it's already starting to impact on prices for some of the older technologies, for some of the older gases. And if you are looking to install a new system within the coming years, it is worth looking to get solutions that are towards the lower end of this table here. So just to summarize on heating, The efficiency of the boiler, the heat source, is important. So if you are looking at a new solution, it's worth looking to get the most efficient solution possible. In terms of boiler efficiency, that would be 95% plus for a modern gas condensing boiler. For air conditioning performance, you'd be looking to see coefficients of performance greater than 3.5, and that's important. As well as that, it's the basics in terms of time control and temperature control, making sure that you're not heating the building out of hours and that you're not overheating your space. And again, all warehouses and all buildings are different. So heating, cooling and ventilation requirements will be completely different depending on the type of building, the age of the building, its construction, and also your options could be limited by what you already have in place. So it's worth taking a look at and maybe getting a review carried out either through the Green Business Fund or through a supplier that can give you advice on that. Okay, so the next section of energy use we're going to look at is forklifts, CRANAGE, and also automated storage. In terms of forklifts, they can account for as much as 7 to 10% of a warehouse's energy costs. And there's a range of different types you're probably all aware of in terms of electric, diesel, LPG, or indeed now fuel cell solutions. So they have their pros and cons. The electric options are typically a bit more expensive to purchase, but in terms of air quality in the warehouse would be the best solution. They're also quieter as well. So the need to charge obviously needs to be managed, and also the cost of charging needs to be looked at, and looking at your electricity tariffs can help in that too. Diesel forklifts are often used outdoors and where you need higher power. Obviously the fumes and noise are an issue whenever it comes to use indoors. LPG can be used indoors where you've got decent ventilation, and can also operate outdoors as well. Typically have more range than electric systems and a less frequent requirement to refill. Fuel cell technology is emerging. It is used by some global logistics companies, but is essentially expensive and in the early stages of development. So the principle is that the fuel cell is fed by hydrogen, sometimes directly or sometimes from natural gas, which avoids air quality issues, addresses the recharging issues of electric forklifts, but it's typically very expensive to consider for smaller users. When it comes to CRANAGE, the main consideration really is the motor efficiency. It mightn't be a frequent purchase, but if you are looking to replace the motor for the crane, it's worth looking towards the IEC standard for efficiency. So that's the International Electrotechnical Commission. So they lay out the efficiency classes of motors. So typically, if you're looking at a crane motor, it could be in the lower end of this chart, in the sort of 2 to 3 kilowatt range. But the efficiency of standard motors is much lower than the more modern premium efficiency, super premium efficiency, and ultra premium efficiency that's now coming through. So looking at the chart here, there's a major difference really from the IE1 standard motor efficiency here, which is sitting in and around 80 to 83%, to what you could achieve on the marketplace today from an IE4 motor, which is up above 90% in terms of its efficiency. The IE5 category has been relatively recently introduced, and we're just starting to see solutions coming through in that bracket, but that will push the efficiency up again. And then if you are going to look towards new builds, towards the latest technology, it may be the case that you're looking towards automated warehouses. They have a number of energy benefits. I suppose firstly, you can reduce the physical footprint of the building, in some cases by as much as 40%. So the smaller the warehouse, the less need there is for heat and light. Potentially product damage can be reduced with avoidance of accidents and those sort of factors. You don't have the same need for forklifts, and also you have reduced labour costs, and potentially you can reduce on packaging requirements within the warehouse too. And I suppose the overall aim is to provide a faster, more productive operation, and potentially that could mean a reduction in operating hours. You might need to operate as long hours to operate an automated warehouse. Obviously, it's a major step change and would be a significant investment if you're looking towards a warehouse of this type. Okay, so the final area we're going to come on to is renewables, and looking at the range of technologies that could be applied to warehousing. The most practical really is solar PV. The likes of wind power gives good performance at scale, but again, you would need to have the available space to achieve that. To install a large turbine, you'd need to get planning consent, and you'd need to look at a range of factors to fit that in to your site. It has been achieved by some at warehouse facilities, but it's typically a long-term investment with payback periods of 10 years or more. Solar thermal as well would be an option to heat hot water, but again, it comes down to the payback period there. It's not typically effective in that regard, and again, paybacks are 10 years or more. And again, biomass isn't necessarily well suited to warehouse heating based on the run hours and the need for heat just through the winter period. The investment would be hard to justify. So really the focus then, if you are considering renewable energy, would be on solar PV. Warehouses are well suited given the available roof space that they have. You need to ensure that you have the structural integrity to support the panels, make sure there's no shading factors that could have an impact on the output of the PV array, and also look at the size of the array relative to your site's electricity profile. So the main benefit would come from offsetting your existing electricity use. So the other key point to note in this is the end to the feed-in tariff scheme. So the feed-in tariff scheme is scheduled to end in March 2019. I think it's currently under consultation, but from what I understand, it will cease then at the end of March. So if you have projects in mind and you're well advanced with your plans, you may be able to get in before the feed-in tariff scheme ends, but if not, it's worth just reviewing the impact that the feed-in tariff has on projects and looking at what the financials look without it. So essentially, as we're saying, solar PV is probably the best fit for warehousing. You can see here in the chart the impact that the feed-in tariff has. So we're looking at a fairly typical array size here of 40 kilowatt peak, cost of about £36,000, which would be fairly typical based on current pricing. That's about £900 per kilowatt peak. It's going to give an output of around 34,000 kilowatt hours. That will vary depending on your location, with some parts of southern Britain getting better output than more northerly locations. So essentially, you're looking at a reasonable financial benefit, both without the fit and with the fit. So with the feed-in tariff there at 4.17 pence for that size of array, you would get an annual benefit of £5,500. Without the fit, that would be more like £4,080. So that changes the payback from 6.6 years to 8.8 years. Obviously, that's still worth considering, and you may be able to improve on the price. The price of £900 per kilowatt is relatively keen, but potentially you could get lower prices after the feed-in tariff ends. And that could improve the financials as well. So it's worth considering in the long term, and indeed it's something that would be recommended to look at after you've looked at the other more cost-effective measures in terms of lighting and in terms of heating improvements. Okay, so I'll just go on to give you a bit of background on the support that is available through the Green Business Fund. Essentially, as you may well know, the scheme's operated through the Carbon Trust, and its aim really is to contribute to improved sustainability and energy efficiency. It serves small and medium-sized businesses in England, Scotland and Wales. It's been running throughout 2017 and 2018. We still have funding available at present, but there is a finite amount, and the scheme, I suppose, is towards the latter stages of its operation. So the fund provides advice, training and direct contribution for capital equipment. In terms of eligibility, as said, it's available in England, Scotland and Wales, and it's available for SMEs and also schools, sole traders and charities. So in terms of the definition of an SME, it essentially needs to meet two of the following criteria. So it needs to be less than 250 employees, it needs to have a turnover lower than 26 million pounds, or it needs to have an annual balance sheet which isn't in excess of 12.9 million pounds. And as well as that, you need to make sure that your organisation isn't more than 25% owned by a non-SME, by a large organisation essentially. But those would be fairly common definitions for SMEs, and it's something that you can check on with the Green Business Fund team if you're not sure. So in terms of the support offered, we offer training through workshops. They're hosted by the Carbon Trust and essentially give you an understanding of energy consumption and help you identify no and low cost measures. You can see here in the chart we have a few coming up at Hensall in Wales, also in Herefordshire, Winchester and Chippenham. We also provide surveys through the Green Business Fund. These are carried out by engineers such as myself who'll visit site, look at your energy expenditure and give you advice as to how to make reductions. These are aimed at businesses with a higher energy expenditure, typically £50,000 or more. Where the energy spend is lower, we can provide advice remotely over the phone. In terms of support in getting your projects moved forward, once you've identified the opportunity, we can help link you up with our panel of accredited suppliers, help you run a tender process to make sure you're getting best value for money, and then review returns as they come through. And as well as that, there is the capital contribution towards energy efficiency projects. And by applying for that, you can get up to 15% of the project cost. to a maximum of £5,000. That applies where the project pays back in 5 years or less. Where the payback period is longer, we base that on the level of savings achieved by the project. Okay, so that concludes presentation this morning. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them now.
Hi there, we've got a question. Are there limiting criteria for charities similar to SMEs for the Green Business Fund?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Sorry about that feedback. The question was, are there limiting criteria for charities which are similar to SMEs for the Green Business Fund?
That's not something I'm aware of. I think charities would still be considered under the same employee criteria, etc. But it'd be worth taking a look at.
And one other question, any experience with film studios or TV studios and their operations, places such as Pinewood, for example? Any special comments about those types of warehouses and grounds?
Well, I suppose the key thing will just be the need for specialist lighting in certain areas. So if there is requirements for studio lighting, it'll have its own specification and requirement. From what I understand, LED technology has come through there as well to provide more efficient solutions, but often it'll be the basics. It could be the likes of external lighting will be worth reviewing, as well as any general lighting, and also the basic good practice in terms of making sure that there's good discipline in switching off lighting whenever it's not required, at the end of filming, at the end of production, or those sort of times, to make sure that there's good control over it. So I think a lot of the basic principles would apply, and in terms of looking at specialist equipment, it'll be worth just having a look whenever it comes to procuring new equipment as to what's now available on the marketplace.
Okay, I don't think we have any further questions, but after the webinar we'll be sending out the recording and the slides, so if you do get any questions later on, feel free to email them over to James and he can get back to you by email. Thanks very much, James, for your presentation today. That was great, and thanks everyone for listening today.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks, Susan.